At some point today, your mind had a conversation with someone who wasn't there. Maybe you were in the shower, maybe you were walking, maybe it happened right before you fell asleep. And in that moment, you said exactly the right thing, the perfect response, the thing you couldn't say when it actually mattered. Or maybe it went the other way. Your mind jumped forward into something that hasn't happened yet and started building everything that could go wrong. Either way, you felt it. Your chest tightened, your mood shifted, something moved inside you for an experience that never actually took place. And if this happens to you often, you've probably asked yourself at some point, why does my brain keep doing this? Here's what most people don't know. It's not random, and it's not a flaw. It's one of the most sophisticated things your brain does. Psychologists call it mental simulation, your mind's ability to run invisible rehearsals. Before you speak, before you act, before you decide, your brain quietly models possible outcomes. Athletes use this deliberately. Surgeons walk through a procedure in their mind before making a single incision. But for most people, this system never fully turns off. So you're walking to the kitchen, and suddenly you're making your case in your own head, saying it clearly this time. And that feels good, because somewhere in your mind, you just got a second chance. But the scenarios your brain keeps returning to, they aren't random either. They almost always connect to something unresolved, a conversation that ended too soon, something you held back and still feel the weight of. And if you pay attention, these imagined scenarios fall into three types. 1. Defending yourself, saying what you wish you'd said, finally being understood. 2. Succeeding, being recognized for something that matters to you. 3. Preparing for loss, moving ahead in your mind, feeling the pain early so you're not caught off guard. 3 different scenarios, one shared instinct, your brain trying to finish something that still feels open. And all 3 feel real for the same reason. Your brain doesn't fully distinguish between a vivid imagined experience and an actual one. The emotion your body produces in response to an imagined argument is the same emotion it produces in a real one. Which means every time you replay a scenario in your head, you're not just thinking about something, you're experiencing something. Now here's what most people miss. People who do this often tend to share one specific trait. They think deeply about how things are perceived, what was said, what wasn't said, what it all actually meant. So the brain fills in those gaps with imagined conversations, not just to rehearse them, but to understand them. At first, this is genuinely useful. It makes you more thoughtful, more prepared, more emotionally aware. But then something shifts, because in your imagination, you always have control. You say the right thing. The other person responds the way you need them to. The outcome makes sense. Real life doesn't give you that. Real people surprise you in ways your imagination never predicted. So slowly, quietly, the imagined version starts to feel safer than the real one. And that's exactly where a powerful tool becomes a comfortable hiding place. Because here's what's actually happening. Every time your mind gives you the emotional reward of a moment without you actually living it, it quietly reduces your drive to go find the real thing. Think about what that means in practice. You imagine the difficult conversation and feel a version of the relief that would come from having it. You imagine the success and feel a version of the satisfaction that would come from earning it. The simulation is convincing enough that your brain registers it as partially done. And so you don't go, you don't say it, you don't start. Not because you're lazy, but because some part of you already got the feeling. That's the quiet cost most people never see coming. Now, the natural impulse when you realize this is to try to shut the scenarios down, to catch yourself mid-simulation and force your mind back to the present. But that's not quite the right move. The more useful shift is this. When you notice a scenario starting, ask what it's actually pointing at. Not what you're imagining, but why that specific moment. What does your mind keep returning to? Because these simulations aren't just noise, they're signals. And a signal is only useful if you follow it back to its source. That's the difference between a mind that rehearses endlessly and one that actually moves. So if you do this often, you don't need to silence it. You need to get curious about what it keeps trying to tell you. because the conversation your mind won't stop building in the background. It's usually pointing at the one you actually need to have.